Hi, and welcome to Scotland Can, our first podcast that is going to try and do two things. The first of them is to say, why don't we accept independent support as a given? If you're watching this, you're probably as tired as I am of seeing panels that have three unionists and one independent voice, or sometimes, much more commonly, four unionists and no independent voice. So what I can guarantee you on this podcast is that all the voices will support independence, but they'll have different points of view, and that's the second idea. We see quite a lot of rancor on social media and elsewhere between people that share something in common. They share a strong support for independence. They may have different views on other topics, but the thing we have in common is the thing we want to make sure will allow us to speak positively to each other. We're going to disagree from time to time. We're going to have topics, I hope, in this podcast that will cause us all to have second thoughts. But we're going to try and do so in a manner that just means we do not fall out, and that we could, if this were not virtual, go and have a drink thereafter. Now, we've got three panelists in addition to myself. I'm Mike Russell. I'm the president of the SNP. I'm a retired politician in a very strong sense, and a politician who would like to retire a bit more. But I'm doing this from my home in rural Argyll in Glendaruel. And my guests today, I have three guests today. The first is Janet Fenton, a Scottish internationalist peacenik. She describes herself as. She also describes herself as a Quaker feminist and internationalist that is Scottish to the core. Janet, welcome. You are Scottish to the absolute core, you say, aren't you? But you spent some time living in Ireland, didn't you?
I did, Mike. And that was a very interesting and informative experience. And actually, when I went to live in Ireland, I kind of thought I was going to be there for the rest of my days. But as things turned out, I came back here and felt there was a lot that we could learn from the way in which Ireland has pulled itself up by its bootstraps and made its republicanism a real contributory factor in the international situation. So,
well, it has been a remarkable success story and continues to be a remarkable success. We'll touch on that at some stage, I'm sure, during the broadcast. But thanks for joining in. My next guest is Charlie Abel. He's a founding member of ALBA, twice an ALBA candidate, traditional musician, filmmaker, Doric speaker, and he describes himself, as I would describe myself, as a lifelong independent supporter. Charlie, lifelong independent supporter, but also standing this week for the ALBA NEC. So are you busy canvassing your fellow ALBA members?
Yes, I'm doing my best, and I wanted to join the NEC so I can get more involved in the party, because I've put a lot of time into ALBA and candidate twice. Previous to ALBA, I was an SNP member, and I used to deliver leaflets for Nicola Sturgeon and any other candidate, Stephen Flynn. I delivered his ones too. Now I'm in ALBA, and I still want independence, and that's what unites us, and I really think that's what's missing, and I think this program's a great idea, Mike.
Good. Well, I mean, as you know, the idea is to be able to have a discussion about the key issues, and one of the key issues is independence. And the next person who's going to join us is Ruth Watson. Ruth is an environmentalist and founder of something called Keep Scotland the Brand. And when I heard you were going to join us today, I looked at your appearance in front of the Scottish Affairs Select Committee and discovered it was all about geographical indicators, which I was dealing with when I was in charge of the Brexit issue in the Scottish government. Have we made any progress on them? Is Scotland the brand secure, or is it still hanging on a sugary nail given Brexit?
Well, so the Keep Scotland the Brand campaign is politically neutral in terms of the constitution because it's for everybody. But personally, I think we will only secure Scotland's brand once we're an independent nation, because I think that I think there's significant risks with the trade deals and the direction of travel with the Westminster government. I think I've heard it described as a plundocracy, and I think that's a pretty good way to describe it. But it's interesting. I mean, I'm a journalist, and I lived at Faslane for a couple of years back when I was a teenager. Spent a couple of years dancing about in the mud outside Faslane. And the Quakers were significantly helpful to us. We used to get our showers thanks to the Quakers. And I actually went, I'm not a lifelong independence supporter. I went from no to yes about a week before the referendum in 2014, but I couldn't vote because I was living in Australia at the time. And I'd kind of missed the whole deterioration of UK the things that I thought were valuable in terms of the NHS and British Rail, and having lived abroad, I'd kind of missed it being asset stripped and torn apart. And one of my former colleagues was sending me information, and I just was like, oh my goodness, this is madness. We've got to get out. And I'm not Scottish to my core, because I am a Scot, and a half Scottish and half Algerian Kabyle. By birth, but by birthright, my adopted dad was Irish, so I'm an Irish national as well. So I've got many hats on.
Many hats indeed, and you became an independent supporter just at the right time, a week before the 2014 referendum, rather than a week after, which was perfect timing. I might have said.
It didn't do the cause any good, I'm afraid. I was in Australia and I couldn't vote.
So let's start with independence, as we must do. It's been a sort of busy few weeks with the independence cause. I was out on the chain across Scotland, the Hands Across Scotland, the Freedom chain. I was at bowling at the west end of the canal, which I have to say was a very cold, sunny but very cold day. We've had the SNP conference, we've got the Alba conference coming. We've had a statement from Jamie Hepburn, the Independence Minister, about what independence could do. Are we in a better position this week than we were last week on independence? Charlie, where do we stand now?
I think we're needing somebody to bring the whole movement together. I was hoping that at the SNP conference that the SNP would have grasped this sort of Scotland United thing, and we could have went forward with that, because I think if people are genuinely keen on independence, it shouldn't matter which political party you're in. We should all be working together to get that independence delivered, and delivered as soon as possible. And when you try and keep something into one political party, it certainly appears to other people, I'm not saying this is a case, but it appears to people looking in from outside the SNP that the SNP are kind of wanting to keep the ball to themselves, and they play with everybody else. And we really need everybody to be playing with that ball. And so I was hoping at the conference they would have united the movement and made a de facto referendum about uniting the votes rather than seats for the SNP. So whether they voted for any party with the manifesto line commitment for independence would have been counted as a vote for independence.
Can I cut in there? Because actually, I think that, Charlie, with all due respect, I think you weren't paying attention if that's what you're thinking, because my interpretation of events, and having spoken to a number of people who were involved in the various addenda that were put forward, I think that is what will be delivered, because you can't expect any political party to, looking at the next democratic forum which is before us, which is the Westminster election. I mean, looking at it tactically, neither Alba nor the Greens are in a position to go anywhere with it. And I think that taking the seats, a majority of seats, as the right for Scotland to begin work towards delivering independence, I think setting up a constitutional convention which takes in the whole of civic society and the full range of political pro-Indy and unionist parties into those discussions is really seriously positive. And I think that then saying, if we are not given the right to hold an independence referendum, then the Holyrood election will be the de facto referendum, which means that every poet, because it's proportional representation, because of the structure of it, which means that anybody voting for a pro-Indy party with independence in its manifesto will be counted as a vote for independence, which delivers exactly what you're asking for. And I think that's quite right too. And in terms of the independence movement, you've got Believe in Scotland, which has got over 132 yes groups from across Scotland, which are, most of them are party neutral. Some have got various really more party leanings than others in its directions. So again, all of the Yes movement is represented, and believe in Scotland, I think those Yes groups are in a very strong position to be holding the various political parties to account from a party neutral Yes group point of view. So I think we're in a much better position than we were a week ago.
What I hear, I hear what you're saying there, but what I hear from people is that they're a little nervous about giving their trust to the SNP, because a lot of things have been promised in the last 7 or 8 years from the SNP and they've not been delivered. And we've talked about a constitution convention before, and we've just had the October 19th pass that was going to be a no if what's referendum. So people have got I don't like to say it or offend anybody, but a distrust towards the SNP. And that's why I think it's key to uniting the movement.
Janet?
I do think that people may be saying these things, but you've got to look at the hows and whys of that. And I mean, we do know that for a very, very long time, there has not been a situation in which Scotland at Westminster has been able to produce a reaction that gives us what we want politically. I mean, we wanted a Labour government for years and years and years and couldn't get one because we don't have enough MPs to actually affect that and deliver it. We want nuclear disarmament. We've not been able to do that, even when we've had every single MP at Westminster in support of that policy. We know about Brexit. We know about all of these things. So when people are saying they don't trust the SNP to deliver that, I think that most of those people are getting their information from the point that Mike started with, which is mainstream media and the way that things are talked up. And I'm not totally convinced by this this lack of faith, because actually I think that we do have a broad spectrum. For me, the SNP has always been something that might be able to deliver independence, and then we could actually sort out the politics that we want, rather than being a political party as such. It's not that. I mean, we have a situation now where we have a pro-independence parliament in Scotland, you know. So if we do take that as the key, then what we need to do is to take policy by policy, I think. And for me, one of the things that's most important is removing consent from policies that we really don't agree with and can't tolerate. And we need to demonstrate how we can do that in different ways. And I do think there is room for a great deal of political divergence in an independent Scotland, and I think that would be healthy and positive.
That's the key point, isn't it? We're all coming from a slightly different point of view. I mean, I'm about halfway towards where Charlie is on this stuff. I do think there is a need to restore confidence in the SNP. I've said it before. I'm speaking as party president, and that's quite obvious that is the case. But I think that the conference went some way to do that. And the SNP and others may well take different positions, but it is that pursuit of independence the most important thing. But let me push a wee bit further on this, because we're all talking about process. We're talking about, how this is done. Actually, I wonder if we shouldn't be selling people the idea of what independence is, rather than the process to secure it. I want people to be really excited by the prospect of independence, to realize that it's going to change everything, and it's going to change people's lives. It's not just, as they used to say in Ireland, changing the color of the post boxes. It is a fundamental change to how we see the world and how we live in the world and how we live with each other. And therefore, we should be out there selling that, because if the people of Scotland sign on to that at 60, 65, 70%, the process doesn't matter. I mean, people will get what they want, and that's what we've got to try and do. So let me ask each of you, this is a bit unfair, but let me ask each of you, what the one thing you want independence to change? and how you're going to go out and tell people that. Janet, what do you want, first of all?
It's an absolute given for anybody that's ever had more than 2 minutes conversation with me that getting rid of nuclear weapons from Scotland would be huge. It would be absolutely huge. It would make such a difference to the resourcing that we have in this country. It would be such a gift to the world. It would be so easy for an independent Scotland to do it. All they need to do is accede to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And if they do that, they would have the backing of 130 United Nations states supporting us in doing that. You'd have the UN at your back, and the UK would have to, by international treaty law, remove what they've got from Faslane. And they haven't got anywhere else to put it. So not only would we get rid of nuclear weapons and free up all those resources for Scotland, but we would also take the first step in a kind of benign domino effect of toppling the nuclear armed hegemony of the nuclear armed states around the world. I mean, I really cannot understand why anybody would not want independence to do that alone, to say nothing of all the other amazing things.
Charlie, are you with Dylan, who I see is asking a question about changing the issue of the monarchy and getting rid of the monarchy with a referendum? Is that your biggest issue, or have you got other big issues? Give us your biggest issue.
Well, those last two issues are both part of the ALBA policy, getting rid of nuclear weapons and having a referendum on a monarchy. But to me, the biggest issue is the poverty, the cost of living crisis that affects most of us in Scotland. And I think with all the energy we have and all the resources we have, we should be getting something for that, because those resources belong to us. And we are not seeing any benefit for that in Scotland. All the stuff's made elsewhere. The electricity costs more up here, with a total imbalance of how things should be in a resource-rich country like Scotland, when we've got so much economic problems. That would be the first thing, I think.
So we've got nuclear weapons, we've got the monarchy, we've got cost of living crisis. Ruth, add your one to it.
Well, both of those are very high on my list of priorities, but seeing as they're already out in terms of sort of desert island discs, I will add land reform through just taxation in a well-being economy framework, because that takes everything in. If we can get taxation of wealth rather than income, then land reform sorts itself out pretty much, and then we'll have money to pay, for example, the unison workers, and make sure that our pensioners and food poverty, that abomination in a wealthy nation, is sorted. So I think we need to have a taxation of wealth, and through that, most other things shall flow fairly.
So cost of living crisis, nuclear weapons, monarchy thrown in, land reform. That seems to me a pretty good package to get working on, to actually say to people, those are the things which you can change. And then you add an enormous number of others. I remember being, during the 2014 referendum, I was education secretary, being attacked for saying education would improve after independence. Well, of course it would, because the resources will change. The allocation of resources will change. I mean, Charlie, I know you're a Doric activist. The question of Scotland's languages comes up, paying attention to Scottish culture in a way that we can't possibly do with the narrow resources we've got now. So that's a heady package that we've got. We need to go out and sell that. Is that not more important than process? Charlie, I mean, are you excited? Are you getting excited by that discussion?
Well, it's almost like the ALBA Party conference has started, because these are all the things that we'll be talking about.
I assure you, it has to, never mind.
I think that all these things are, I mean, people like us that are into independence, we're already aware of all these things. And we can talk about things and talk about them, but I think a process is important. We need to get our independence delivered, and we need to get other people that are maybe not keen on it to join us. And the polls are got independence over 50%, and we haven't really even started a campaign. So the door's already open and it's unlocked. We've just got to just push it.
Well, let's do that campaign. Let's go and sell people the idea of independence. Let's go and sell people the idea of a nuclear-free Scotland. Let's go and sell people the idea of land reform. Land reform, I'm sitting here in Argyll. Land reform is a very big issue for me, a very big issue for me indeed. So we need to be out there saying that to people. The question, Ruth's an activist on the issue of the brand and of the products of Scotland and the food and drink of Scotland. We need to be saying to people there's a huge amount there that people can support. So why aren't we doing that? I mean, why aren't we doing that? Are each of us doing it all the time?
Well, can I please dive in there, Mike? Aye, for sure we are doing that. There's plenty of us haven't stopped doing that. And I think that for the last 2 years, I've spent a significant part of my Sundays and on Friday evenings first talking to the National Yes Network and then the Believe in Scotland network, which was kind of like I think a sort of better framework than kind of what we were trying to do with the National Yes Network, but with more resources and nous thrown in. And I think that the materials that these 132 Yes groups across Scotland, the materials that we are working with the team at Believe in Scotland on developing and bringing out, those materials, those campaigns, they're out and they're live, and we are doing things and we sort of from the rallies and from the new materials that are coming, I think there's a lot to be done. There has been that hiatus. I mean, COVID hit a lot of people and the cost of living crisis has hit a lot of people. And so it's kind of hard to get people out, and it has been hard to get people out when folk have been scunnered. The 19th of October was when we were supposed to be having our independence referendum before it went to the courts, and the courts, surprise, surprise, said, oh no, you couldn't possibly have your democracy. But I think, obviously process matters, but process when people's hearts are already there, when people are angry, or whether angry but with a positive direction to take that anger in, or they can see that there's a way out through something. I think that's, people will turn out to vote when their hearts are in it. It's not so much about the head, it's where the heart is at. And I think that the whole inclusiveness of the Yes movement, the whole fact that the Europeans who are resident here, so new Scots who are resident here, 16 and 17-year-olds, there's a lot of people that are very much ready for the messaging to get. There's also that thing about being on the winning side. It's part of, there's a phrase for it, and I can't remember what it is at the moment, but there's a phrase for when you're campaigning, people want to be on the winning side. And I think that, I think that if we can show, that when we're out, we're the positive ones, we're the ones who've got the wind in our sails, we're the direction of travel. I think that's very powerful. So I think positive campaigning and positive materials, which I think is why the Yes movement needs to be separate from the political party structure. I think it's important.
I understand that.
You can do that.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying there. And just thinking about these topics that are where our hearts are, that Mike has raised, what are the key issues, and all of them are totally integrated. I'm involved with a small kind of group of people just trying to think together different ways of working in Scotland called Secure Scotland, and we're actually looking at what makes people feel secure, because it sure as hell ain't nuclear weapons and padlocks and barbed wire and fences. It's all the stuff that we've just been talking about. It's having enough to eat. It's having a safe roof over your head. It's the baby box is a wonderful example. All these kind of things, and certainly getting rid of nuclear weapons. But somehow to share that as a package and make that very clear as a package, to me, is much more important in winning hearts and minds than all this stuff about political process. And I do think that it's all they've got left. It's all the unionists have left, is the ability to to wind us up in different directions over that stuff, instead of actually talking about the things that really matter, talking about the things that people are interested in. And I know when we got the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, one of the most important aspects to that was that we refused in the negotiations with the diplomats to talk about political and national security concerned. We talked about humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons on people and on the environment that they lived in. And that was what enabled us to win that. And I think Scotland is a small enough country. I think our culture is of huge importance. We're a small enough country. There's only 5 million of us. We should surely be able to talk to each other, and be able to talk to each other with greater authority than a London-based BBC and UK-based media.
Then let's focus down on this a little, because one of the things, Charlie, I think that the differences between not us personally, but the parties that we're in, is I don't think that you have given enough recognition to how the circumstances have ruled things in the last 2 or 3 years. COVID was an enormous difficulty. I mean, I've been writing recently about it and the interface with that and the Brexit process. And I think we don't fully understand that. And now people feel very insecure for a variety of reasons. They've come through COVID, but they're still nervous and worried. We know, I mean, that the effect of that will take a long time to work out. We've got the cost of living crisis. We've got this appalling government at Westminster, and we've got huge international insecurity, which is under the threat of nuclear weapons and nuclear destruction. Not just, of course, with Ukraine, but now with Gaza too. People are very, very insecure. How do we relate independence to people feeling better about themselves and where they live and how they live? That seems to me probably the biggest issue that we haven't yet tackled. And it's very, very difficult to look at it. And it can't be done just by politics or by sloganizing. It's a really, really difficult set of issues. I want to move on from that into the situation in Gaza in a moment, but just let's go into it that way. Charlie, do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that is true. How do we sell it to them? We need to show them they'll be better off in an independent Scotland. We need to show them that they won't have to pay so much for their electricity.
Not just financially. I mean, in terms of their well-being, how people feel. That's really important.
To be happier in independent Scotland, we'd have a fairer, more egalitarian society. That's what we traditionally are as a country, and that's where our natural home would be. We wouldn't be a basket case like the UK government would make out we would be. We can see all the resources we have here on our doorstep. We know we're a clever bunch of folk with a good Scots tongue in our head, and we'll manage fine on our own. Thank you very much, Ken.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, but it's bringing all those things together holistically to say that this is not about just having more bobbies in your pocket. This is about making sure that the world is a different place and we can influence it in a different way. Let me come into the horror that we're facing. Sorry, Charlie, on you go.
Also, culture as well. We should be promoting Scottish culture, music, our history, our language. All that is part of it as well.
Yeah.
I think that there's a real issue. There are people who perhaps in times of international strife would have thought, well, the Westminster government, they've got our backs. For whatever reason, sort of better together and Project Fear, that kind of worked because in times of conflict, sort of people would come together. However, I think there are some fundamental changes now. You've got a wide recognition within the armed forces that the UK government is basically dismantling the armed forces, and I think that if we could convey to the people of Scotland, especially those within the armed forces, that the Scottish regiments would be valued and maintained as a kind of defensive force. I think that would go a long way towards helping people feel secure. I think that the Scottish Constitutional Convention would make people feel more secure because they would feel more involved with the decision-making process. It wouldn't feel, it's something that Leslie Riddoch speaks about a lot, the way in which the centralisation of democracy has removed democracy and the processes from people. So I think that when the Scottish Constitutional Convention is put forward, we need to find ways, or the Scottish Constitutional Convention needs to actually help reintroduce democracy back into communities, because when people feel empowered, that's when they feel. It's one of the few good things that came out of COVID was the way in which local communities didn't wait to be rescued; they did it themselves. So I think that empowerment was very powerful, and I think that
one of the things as well that came out.
Jan, just before you come in, I just want to recognise Wilma Bowie, who's been in twice on this, and I just want to thank her for the work she did on the chain of freedom. Those of us who were there know she put in a power of work. And that also is the type of thing that needs to be done, that people get together, they can see the strength in numbers. Janet, on you go. I just wanted to mention.
I think that's right. I think it is really important that we get together in that kind of way. I just wanted to say that I remember shortly before the referendum, I was in Morrison's supermarket and there were two wee boys who were about 8 years old that were standing in front of the fish counter. And one of them pointed at one of the fish and said, "Is that a Scottish fish?" And the other one said, "Dinny Ken." And the first one said, "We'll need to find out, because if we get independence, we'll need to buy Scottish fish to improve the economy." And I mean, these were kids, you know.
Very advanced you have.
I just found it so gratifying to see that level of political engagement. And that, to me, it's a tragedy if we allow that to slip away completely and turn it into something that is about different political parties, because I think all of us would share that aspiration that those wee boys had. You know, I really do. And I think the idea of the draft constitution is hugely important, because I think that is actually a way of putting that conversation back on the table in ways that people can really kind of get their teeth into and start building a vision. And that's very important.
Something the Yes movement did achieve last year, and it's something that doesn't seem to be well enough known about. I mean, we had a group of people that worked very hard over just over a year, took some of the documents that others had done, like the Constitution movement, the document Neil McCormack had produced, a draft document that was produced before 2014, developed a transitional constitution, which I believe now has been given to a range of organizations to look at. And that does exist, a constitution that we could adopt after voting for independence, that would take us through the process of independence and then towards a final constitution, which should be crowdfunded by the people of Scotland, crowdsourced by the people of Scotland themselves. So that was an achievement that the Yes movement was able to work on. But look, I want to move us on. I'm conscious of time, and I don't want to fail to touch upon a couple of other things. And one of the things I want to touch on, which we've come towards, is this feeling of insecurity, and that insecurity fueled by, of course, what we're seeing on the televisions, what we've seen for the last year and a bit in the Ukraine, and then in the last couple of weeks in Gaza. Janet, start us off in this, because I think all of us will have very strong feelings. I listened with to an extraordinary contribution by Nadia Councillor Dundee, Humza Yousaf's wife, whose parents are presently in Gaza. And I think we all need to think about our humanity. We need to condemn any violence of any description that takes place and the persecution of others. But we do also need to raise our voices when we see injustice and violence taking place. Janet, your reflection.
Absolutely, we need to raise our voices, and not just that, but going back to what I said earlier about removing consent, if there are ways in which we can do that, we absolutely must do that. Because the one thing that is crystal clear about the situation in Ukraine, and consequently the situation that's arisen in the last few weeks in Israel-Palestine, is that violence and the use of force is never going to resolve these issues. there have to be other ways, and there are numerous other ways. And I mean, Secure Scotland had a number of conversations standing for peace in difficult times. And one of these, we had a man called Tom Clonan, who is a former member of the Irish Defence Force. He's an army person. He was a captain in the Irish Army, and he also was a military analyst with the Irish Times. He was a whistleblower on sexual harassment on women in the Irish Army. You know, he has a very, very clear view and a very different view. And I wanted to mention that perspective on neutrality, on the use of force, on how a defence policy could work for a future Scotland. It could be very, very different. But one of the things that he spoke about was the fact that there are any number of different methods of doing ceasefire. There are all sorts of different ways that it can be negotiated. There are all sorts of different ways that diplomatic efforts can be made. There are all sorts of ways in which pressure to ensure that relief and work with refugees can be conducted. We're not doing any of them. We're not doing any of them. And that's because of the UK government. A Scottish government could do things very, very differently. It's to me, it absolutely underscores the need for independence. I would like to see Scotland contributing to international peace and security instead of being a launch pad for waging war, as we used to say in the peace testimony. I mean, we should not have these weapons here. Their existence means a constant possibility of escalation to their use. There are people that are doing sensible things. The Irish diplomats are trying to put international legislation through to have a political declaration against any use of explosive weapons in populated areas. Think what a difference that would make. There's also a resolution being proposed to insist on ceasefire anywhere within a certain distance of any nuclear facility. Think what a difference that would make. At the moment, we're facing the grave danger of nuclear escalation and all the damage that will undo as far as any efforts we make for climate remediation. And the military footprint is the biggest institution that is contributing to the climate disaster. I just can't believe that the only thing people can think of is sending more weapons to Ukraine or escalating violence in Israel-Palestine. It's just unbelievable.
Charlie.
Yeah, I think it's a terrible situation, and like Alex Salmond has called for an absolute cease of all action going on to the UK government, and it can never be.
As have many, just to be fair.
Sorry? So I'm losing my connection.
As have many others, of course, just to be fair.
Yes. I think it's absolutely awful when you've got a situation like that and there's like terrorists and you've got retaliations and the result is the death of civilians and children. It's just absolutely unforgivable, and the international community need to have a look at themselves for allowing this to continue.
Good.
So where do I begin? What we're looking at is a 70-year, 80-year impact of colonialism in the modern world writ large, because obviously when Israel came into being, nobody asked the Palestinians what they thought about it. Now, I completely understand why the Jewish people, after the horrors of the Holocaust, were looking for a home state, and I understand why what became Israel was decided upon. I think that there have been decisions made that historians will look at probably for centuries to come. But what we now have is a group of 2 million people squeezed into the Gaza Strip, which is the size of the island of Aran. And it is not ordinary Israelis that are the problem. Generally speaking, it would appear to be that the Zionists have got very much some of the rhetoric that has been coming out of sort of like erasing even the memory of the people of Palestine. It's really horrifying stuff. And I was looking and engaging with some of there's a very large Jewish community on Blue Sky, which is a much nicer place as opposed to Twitter, or X as it now is. And their perspective, it's very, very interesting watching the Jewish community and Israeli community, sort of people who have connections with Israel, discussing this. And one of the things that many are talking about, which I hadn't even begun to understand, is that the reason why right-wing Christian fundamentalists in America are supporting this is because of their rapture and the sort of their belief that Scripture will come to pass as long as enough Jewish people are killed, that there will be Armageddon and we will all ascend to heaven, which seems an absolutely astonishing way to try and deliver international policy. But I mean, from my point of view, obviously, genocide is happening before our eyes, and obviously the world needs to respond to stop genocide from happening before our eyes, because you cannot bomb hospitals and churches and communities to say that you're going to erase, I don't know, however many hundreds of terrorists might be in their midst. It's just absolutely appalling. And I was very pleased to see Barack Obama, the former president, writing the kind of measured response that you would hope international senior figures would be talking about, that we need to have a peaceful solution and a just solution. From my personal perspective, looking at what is happening globally, I'm pretty depressingly convinced that there is a fairly significant attempt to shift the global power model that has been happening. We've seen it over the last few years with sort of the rise of the right-wing sort of strong man, to sort of paraphrase, sort of from Duterte in the Philippines to, Putin's never-ending quest for world domination, it would appear. And this is being used as a shield for the extra bombing that is now happening in Idlib and in Syria. So President Assad is on the move again. And this fits in very much with Narendra Modi and his very right-wing nationalism, and that gives me great concern. And I mean, from my personal perspective, when I was a 19-year-old peace camper, I stayed at Faslane for a couple of years, and I used to go down on sort of forays down to Greenham Common Peace Camp in the winter when they needed folk, and sort of being a hardened outdoor liver, I was up for it, having young blood. And I remember one night there was tension on the Golan Heights. And we knew that Israel had nuclear weapons, or sort of small scale, not the big bombs, but sort of small scale nuclear weapons. And we knew that they were being moved up to the Golan Heights. And there were, every now and then at the base, the cruise missile carriers would go out onto the common. They would have drills and test runs, and usually we could sort of scamper about and sort of stop them, and it would be cat and mouse between us and the soldiers. This night, the Greenham Common base was at, I think it's code black, that is like the highest state of alert. And the missile carriers came out and they were surrounded by armed guards. There was no way anybody was getting in the way of it. And that night we had soldiers coming to the camp to talk to us because they were scared. And I was 19. And I remember thinking that it was 6 miles to the nearest phone box, and I was going to be able to say goodbye to my parents. And I was watching families drive home at night. And I knew that night was critical. And I knew that things might happen that could change everything if the men of war didn't sort themselves out. And so I spent a night not knowing if I would see the next day. And the next day came, and I looked around me and I thought, there's a whole world that has no idea how close we came. And it is just madness to see it all happening again.
Well, it's been happening constantly and regularly across the world during the many years that have passed. And the occasions where that has been highlighted and marked up Obviously, the Cuban Missile Crisis was the start of that kind of occasion. Most recently, the nuclear scare in Hawaii, and any number of very near accidents, mishaps. It's only a matter of time, and the more time that goes by, the more likely it becomes. It's a simple matter of risk assessment to understand that. We stand on a precipice, and the only thing that I would say is that what is absolutely, absolutely clear is that as long as these weapons exist, there is a very, very real and ever-present danger that something will happen and it will start and it will be the end of us all. And that situation is the risk that is taken every time that somebody uses physical organized violence to so-called resolve any situation that's happening, whether it's in DRC, where the uranium mining has created a civil war, whether it's in Yemen, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in South America, wherever it is. That is the danger that we're currently facing all the time. And what we have to do is find ways of making an intervention that does not involve using physical violence, because every time you do that, you set off the next round, which is to increase the level of violence that is possible. And we know where that's going to take us.
Well, we started this discussion about independence and we've worked our way around back to the issues of peace and common humanity. And we started the discussion by saying, we should be able to talk. And if people are able to talk rather than to confront each other, then there is hope. And that's what we're going to go on trying to do in our small way in Scotland and perhaps influence the world in a larger way. It's been quite a sobering discussion that we've had, I have to say. I suspect those who've been with us have not been cheered up by it, but they perhaps have confronted the realities and also the reality of Scotland being a better place to live if we can communicate with each other. But I'm not going to leave those who are with us and yourselves without a slight spark of hope. I'm going to ask you a really existential question at this time of year as we get close to Halloween. And we need this answer to illuminate what's happening in Scotland. I was driving to the SNP conference 10 days ago, and I found myself to astonishment driving past a field of pumpkins. So I really need to know, is it neeps or pumpkins? I can smell the burning turnip in my past and the sore hands from scooping out a turnip. It's not an easy thing to do with a neep. Pumpkins are much easier. So I'm afraid it's a quick answer from all of you. I will start with you, Ruth. Is it neeps or pumpkins?
I'd like to be Team Tumshoe, but actually I'm Team Pumpkin.
Oh dear. Right. I'm going to leave the last word to Charlie. I hope he's with me. So, Janet.
Well, I would say neeps, but it's also about the language. It's about what you call things. And in our supermarkets, I'm sick of seeing brambles called blackberries and neeps called turnips.
Right. Okay. So it's language, but the neeps has it. So actually, I think Ruth's going to be in the minority here if I hope that Charlie's answer is going to be the one I'm expecting. Neeps or pumpkins?
I like neeps better. That's the tradition here. You can whenever. But see, as a dad, it's much easier to carve a pumpkin than it is a neep. So.
Well, I know I had an American intern when I was in the Parliament who had never heard of a neep lantern. So at one weekend I made one for him, and my hands were sore for ages afterwards. It brought back bad memories. But anyway,
can I very quickly just say though that at least neep lanterns, if they're put out in your garden or the woods, that's fine because they're local and creatures can eat them. Please never leave a pumpkin outside because they give hedgehogs terribly, terribly sore tummies that can kill them. So please, if you're going to be Team Pumpkin, make sure that you bury it or you roast it. Team Tumshoe, it's all good.
I don't want to fall out with the pumpkin growers of Scotland, so I'm not going to warn them about sore tummies for hedgehogs. We have covered it all here, I have to say. That was our first attempt to say Scotland can. I'm really grateful to everybody who's taken part, to those who have watched and put their questions in. I'm sorry we didn't take a lot of questions, but we'll try better next time. I want to thank Ruth, I want to thank Janet, I want to thank Charlie, and we have been able to talk for almost 50 minutes and not fallen out with each other. That's a very good start. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mike.
you.
Bye.
Bye.